So today we're going to take a look at React state and props and go into details as exactly when state changes to a prop and how props and state work and how we should manage it and how the hierarchy within our component, how our application should work together. So we're starting here with a basic npm or npx create React app, and this is just the boilerplate that comes with the create React app package. So as we can see here, if we run npm start in our terminal, this is what we get. We get the whole Learn React boilerplate page and the spinning logo as usual. And what we're going to do is just going to quickly strip this out, and we're going to have a look at building our own application, which will be a simple form. So I'm just going to delete this test. We don't need this. We're not going to do any testing today, so don't worry about that. Yep, get rid of that. We'll remove the logo, we don't need that. So we're just going to try and keep things that are relevant to us today. I won't go into too much detail and remove everything, but if we have a look inside app, here's what we're seeing on the page right now. So we've crashed the app because we've deleted the logo, which is needed here, as we can see here. The logo is used, so we're just going to remove the logo, and then we're going to remove all this content from here. And I'm just going to do a p tag for paragraph, of course. And I'm just going to do the classic hello world. I'm going to hit save, and what we should see now on our page is hello world. Cool, it worked. So let's now delve a bit deeper into here and what the hierarchy currently looks like. So we've got this div surrounding our app component with the class name app, and we're also importing app CSS. Let me just have a look in here. Of course, this is default CSS that comes with Create React app, and I'm not going to remove any of this today because we're not really particularly looking at CSS. We're looking at more state and props. But if you want to know why everything is centered on the middle of the page right here, it's because of this right here. And this is the class name app, text align center. So we're going to leave that in just for the sake of keeping this centered and keeping it nice and tidy and easy to see and read. But we're not going to do any CSS today. So what does the hierarchy of our current component look like? Let's take a look. So index, which is right here, index.js, is the overall container for our whole application. We have everything we build will be inside index.js. And if you want to know what index is, it's basically this file right here, which calls the app component inside of it. This is the very, very top level of our application. Something we don't really want to mess with. It is what it is. We're going to work within app specifically. So if we just have a look at index CSS, we can see here, this is where all your global CSS goes. So CSS on the body, zero margin, family fonts, that kind of thing. Stuff that is specifically for the whole application. If we look back at our app, which we're in there now, that sits inside index.js. So this is where we're going to build our components and build our application. We will consider this our top level moving forward, or the top level that we want to use, basically. So let's have a look. What we're going to do today is we're going to build, first of all, in our SRC folder, we're going to create a new folder called components. And inside this folder, we're going to have a file called form.js, and we're going to have a file called user.js. Okay. So I'm just going to quickly import React. If you're wondering what I'm using, this is called an extension called React Snippets, and you can shorthand type the React boilerplate, and it will give you a quick boilerplate to save you typing out the whole thing. So this is user, and I'll quickly do the same for form. And we're using React hooks today, so we're not going to look at class components or anything like that. We're just going to focus on hooks and keep these as functional components, not class components. So okay, I'm going to just quickly in here write the name of the component, and I'll save that. And again in here we'll have form. And then in app.js here, what we're going to do is import those. So let's import user first. And then we'll import form. Now the reason why they're underlined is because we haven't imported them, so let's import them. So let's import user from components, user, and then we'll do the same here for form and form. So now they're imported, and now what we should see on the page is user and form because we're referencing these two. So let's go back to our application, and there we go. Now they're nested inside of our app. So now our hierarchy is starting to look more like this, but we have user and form at the same time. So let's go back and have a look. And what we want user to do is we want user to basically render the user's details on the page. And form will be an input where the user will input their job title and it will display in user. Okay, so for that we need to establish some state. Okay, and when you're working with state, we want our state to always be at the top level. We want it to be at the top and we want to pass it down into components. We don't want to, because we're going to need state, the same state in user as we need in form, we don't want to have any state in user because then we can't pass state sideways to form. It has to come down. So we want our state to be in the top component where we need it, which is app in this case, and we want to pass it down into user and pass it down to form and access the same state in both places. So to do that, I'm just going to import React here just for simplicity's sake, and we're going to access the hook use state. And then here we're going to reference user and set user from use state, and we will have undefined default state at the moment. So don't worry if you don't know what this is, just bear in mind that when we access use state, we have access to two things inside of use state. The first one being a variable, the second one being a function that sets this variable. So we can call this whatever we want, but the first one is always a variable, and the second one is always the function that sets this variable. So at the moment, and then in here, in this parentheses, we can set default state if we want to. So at the moment, if I was to set default state to Michael, user is now when the page renders, user is now equal to the string Michael. Okay. If at some point in my application I set the user to David, when the page renders, the user is equal to Michael, and then the user will change to David. So then user will be equal to David. So we can play around with state here. But for the sake of keeping things simple, we will just have this undefined right now. So user is equal to undefined, set user is doing nothing because we're not referencing it, we're not calling it, we're not using it. So this is state. We've declared state. State now lives here. And we should always remember that state is immutable, which means it cannot be changed. That means I cannot do like we would if we had a variable. We could do const, let's put second user is equal to, again, we'll go with David. We'll make this a let actually. I cannot say, with a variable, I can say, I can redefine let, and this can be, we'll call it Daniel. We're redefining second user here, which is common with variables. Now with state, we can't do that. For example, I can't do user is now equal to David because state is immutable. We have to access the set user function to change state. So if we want to ever change the state, we have to use set user, which is a function available to us from the use state hook. Okay, so always remember that you can't redefine state, it's immutable unless you access the function that comes with it, so setting state instead. Alright, so what we're going to do first is we're going to pass state into our user component, and this is where the line between state and props starts to grey. So at the moment, user equals nothing, but user is our state. And in user, I want to display here in user. Let's have a look. At the moment, we don't really do anything here. But what we're going to do is I'm just going to delete this. I'm going to put the parentheses back in because I want multiple lines. I'm just going to set a React fragment, which encapsulates our whole component. And here, I'm going to put hello, and then we're going to access user. So whatever user holds, it will say here. So hello Michael, hello David, hello Emma, whatever it may be, will say here. The second thing we will do will be job title, and that then will access, let's just put job role. Okay. Now at the moment these are undefined. This component has no idea what these states are. And in fact, no, you know what? We're gonna make this an object. So we'll do first name. This is dot notation. We are gonna make an object. User's details will be an object, okay? And this will be user dot job role. Okay. So let's just go back to app, and I'm gonna set some default state here because we don't have access to it to an API or a database, so we're not going to grab this information when the user logs in. For the sake of this, we're going to mock the data. So an object, and we're going to have first name, we'll have Emma, we'll have job role, and for this we will keep job role as undefined, so it won't be anything. Because we're going to allow the user to set their own job role. And of course we can have other things here like age, email address, phone number, whatever we want, but for today we're only going to look at these two things. So I'll save this, and I'll save this, and it'll crash because we don't know what those things are yet. User is not defined. Of course it's not. Right here, it tells us right here. So now we need to pass state into this component and access it inside user. So how do we do that? So here's the user component. The first thing we're going to do now is write a prop. And a prop is something you want to pass in to a component. The prop is going to be user. So the first thing I type in here can be literally anything. It can be any word that I want it to be. So I can name this, let's say, users details. Okay? Now, the word users details is accessible now inside the user component, but it's equal to nothing right now. I can say that I want the word users details to be whatever is in user. Okay, so here's the prop, here's the state. Prop state. For the sake of conventions, we don't want to change the name of our state as we're passing it down in the form of a prop. Ideally, what we want to do is keep it the same so it doesn't get confusing when our app starts to grow, that the state changes name as we pass it down. So we're going to call our prop user, and user will be equal to the user state, which is equal to the first name Emma, job role undefined. So what we could do if we really wanted to, if we didn't want to access it, if this was a huge object with many like age, phone number, email address, all the things we didn't want, if we only wanted name and job role in here, we could just say, you know, first name is equal to user dot first name, and we could do job role is equal to user dot job role, and that way first name and job role would be equal to these two things inside there. But for this particular example, we're just going to keep it as user and user, so we want to access this whole object. All right. So let's take a look at user. How do we call it in here now? So how do we access these props? Well, in our parentheses here, in our function for the user component, we add curly bracket. There's two ways to do it. We can access props like that. Okay. So that's it. What we're doing right now is we're saying that anything that's passed inside here, so we could have multiple props in here. At the moment, we've only got one. It's called user. We could have multiple props in here, and we access them all by calling props. So this would be props.user.firstName, props.user.jobRole. Now, it can get very long, very wordy, so we should probably destructure and make this neater and easier to read. So what we can do is add curly brackets. I'm going to remove the props here as well. And we can say, okay, we're passing in the prop of user. So we remove the need for the word props because we're specifying what we've passed in, right? Right there. So now we can reference user.firstName, user.jobRole. So if we save that and we have a look, now what we should see is hello, Emma, job role, undefined, or nothing. Okay, perfect. So that has worked. Form is still there because we haven't looked at form yet. All right, so now what we want is the user to be able to change their job role. Let's take a look. Okay, so let's take a look at form, and what we're going to do here is exactly the same as what we did on the user app component. We're going to add a React fragment, and then we're going to have just a simple input. Okay, type is text, yep, and we're going to make it self-closing. We're going to add a placeholder that will be enter job role. Let's take a look. Cool. We're also going to add a button, type of submit, and we're just going to wrap this in a form. And because we're encapsulating our whole component in one tag, there's no need for the fragment anymore. We can just use form, and we'll say on submit we're going to fire an event handler, but right now don't do anything, it's fine. Okay, let's have a look. Oops, let's add a button. Let's make it the type of submit. Of course, this is super ugly right now, but that's absolutely fine. We don't need to worry about that. So what we're going to do is when the user types in here, we want to see that on the page, on the job role. So let's have a look. What we want to do now is create some event handlers. And what they are is on change method for when the input changes, and a submit method for when the form submits. Okay, so we're going to call this handle change. And again, it's just a basic arrow function, nothing too fancy. And in here, what's going to happen is we're going to access the event, and we're going to set user. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to create an object, and we're going to say, because what's going to happen right now, right? If we just set user and we make this e.target.value, and e.target.value accesses whatever the target value is inside the input. Okay, so that whatever we type in the input will set as the user. Don't forget, set user is a function that sets the user variable. So that will delete our defined state here, our predefined state, our default state. We'll delete that and replace it with whatever we put in here. Now, we don't want to delete everything because we want to keep the name, don't forget. The name stays the same. We don't want to lose that. We just want to set the job role. So what I want to do is I want to create an object, and I want to spread user in first. So what we're saying is when the input changes, take the user variable that already exists, which is this right here, and push it in, spread it into the user. So basically copy whatever's in here, don't remove it completely, put everything in. And then I'll say, but predefine job role to whatever e.target.value is. So keep the user, but change the job role to what is typed in the input. All right. So now we need access to this in form, and again, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to call it handle change because we don't want to defer too much on what the name of our functions are. Let's go to form. We do the same thing as we did before. We pass in the handle change by destructuring, not whole props. And then on here, on the input, we have an onChange method. So when you change input, I want you to run handle change. All right? So what we should see now, and let's, if we go back to app, let's console log the user. And I'm going to wrap this in an object bracket so we can see in the console instead of just seeing random things. We're going to see it's currently an object. Let's see. This is on render, so I'll refresh the page so we can see properly. So the default state, user just loaded. What we get with user is first name Emma, job role undefined. Now, if I was to type, let's say, manager, we can see right away that this updated. We also kept the name. So let's look at what our state is now. And we can see here that user is now equal to Emma and the job role is manager. And if we look further down here, we'll see that it logged the state on every keystroke. All right. So it updates as we go. Now, I mean, that's great. We've achieved what we want to achieve, but ideally we don't want it to update as we type. We want to just really just hit submit and then update, you know. And if we look at the moment we hit submit, it refreshes the page as well, which, you know, we don't really want to do. Okay, so back in our app component, what we're going to do is create a handle submit. And what we don't want in our application, because it's kind of bad user experience, is we don't want the user to type in and see it appear on the page as they're typing. You know, it feels kind of clunky. It doesn't really feel nice. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another bit of state using the useState hook, and it will be job, and of course it will be set job. Naming convention is variable name and then set variable. Okay, so again, use state. This will start as undefined. We won't have any default state for this. And then we'll have a handle submit, which is another handle method. Again, it's just a simple arrow function. And in here, we're going to change things around. So we're going to take what currently happens when the user types in the input, and we're going to move that into our handle submit. So don't forget the E for event. So now, when the user hits submit, we will set the user object, okay, with the job role. The problem is that we don't want it to do it like this. We're going to, first of all, when the user types, we will set job instead. Okay? So whenever the user types in the input, we will set whatever's in the input to the variable job, which is right here, using the set job function from the useState hook. So now job role, when the user submits, will be equal to job instead. So let me just recap. When the user types in the input, we will store the value in the input to set job, or to the job variable here, using the set job function as part of the useState hook. When the user hits submit, we will take that variable from job and we will save it in the user object here to the job role right here, currently undefined, but it will be job once the user hits submit. So let's pass in the handle submit to our form, because that's where we need it, again, in the form of a prop called handle submit. Save this. Here we're going to access handle submit. And then what we're going to say, when this form submits, run handle submit. Okay? So because the type of buttons is submit, it will run the onSubmit handle submit function here. So what we should see now is that when the user uses the form right here to update, so if we type manager now, as we can see, it isn't updating the job title, but when we hit submit, we get the update. And one thing I forgot to add, you'll notice that when we type here and we hit submit, the page refreshes. We don't want that to happen. We can stop that by saying E prevent default function on handle submit. So when you're in handle submit, do not wipe the form, do not refresh, do not prevent, do not result to default. Ignore that. So let's try that again. manager, and there we go. Quick, simple, easy way to quickly see how our props and state work together. So in the current format, what we've got here is, here's our state. This is our state right here. It lives in the top component. Let's just look at our chart, our graph again. It lives in the top component. We're passing it down into user and also form, and we're accessing it in there. Now, this makes it super simple for us. If we're to come back later on and edit and want to change our state, we don't have to go looking around all the components to find it. We want to keep these components as dumb as possible, and we want to keep one component that has the logic in, because that way it makes it easier to handle, easier to manage moving forward, especially as the app grows. We don't want state all over the place. But for argument's sake, let's say in the future our app may scale, and it may look something like this. So moving forward, this may become some sort of dieting app or a recipe app where we have the user's information, stats and statistics kept on whatever we may keep them on. If it's diet stuff, it'll be calories and things like that, exercise, etc. And then recipes, so users' recipes they've stored for whatever reason, or diet, whatever it is they're on. And the thing is, with this current layout, what we want is we want to have a container method that houses our components along with that. All right. So the user container will be the place where we contain all our state that is relevant to the user only. So that might be name, email address, phone number, those kind of things. Stats will be things like calories, or it may be something along those lines where the user can see their calorie deficit or their exercise they've done, how much time they've gained, etc., etc. Recipes will, of course, be where our recipes are kept, or where the user keeps their recipes that are relevant to their diet, or whatever it may be. So obviously the recipes aren't really needed in the user container. The statistics for calories and stuff aren't really needed in the user container because this is personal information. However, we might have some global state, and global state might be needed in all three components, in which case we'll keep it up, and that's absolutely fine. We can have our global state in app that is needed in multiple containers or multiple components, and in the user stats and recipes container, we'll keep state that's specifically used in these components. So we can keep it nice and organized and make it really easy to access that. And don't forget, when state is passed down, it becomes a prop. So that may look like this, for example. We'll create one right now, and I'll make a user container. And again, import React. We'll make it a functional component, and we'll call it user container. And then in here, all we're simply going to call is user, and we're going to call form. Now, because we've not got one component or tag that wraps the whole thing, we're going to need to use React fragment. And I'm just going to quick import. So if I do that, press enter, it will import it automatically for me. And the same for form. There we go. They're both imported. So now we need to move our state down. So I'm going to copy this. Oh, sorry, I'm going to copy this into here. And of course, I need to import useState to be used. And then I need to move these down as well because they're specifically used in these components that we're accessing, nowhere else. And then actually I can just copy this into here. And we've not really changed much. We've just moved things down one level. So now all we need to do in here is let's remove the things we're not using anymore. We're not using useState in here. And then we're going to just import user container like that. So we'll have a look at our application, and absolutely nothing has changed in here. We've just moved everything down, but now all our state for users in user container, and this is where we will do all our user things, and we may create more containers that live in the app. For example, like I said before, stats container, and the other containers we will need here, but we'll keep them here, and any global state will live here instead. So I hope that made sense. I hope that was a clear example of how state becomes a prop and how we pass things down into components to manipulate data, and then we keep them in one central place. And the hierarchy of your component is one of the things that beginners to React struggle with. And once you understand how state and props work and how the hierarchy and the architecture of your component works, React becomes a whole lot easier to understand and grasp. So when you're building a project, it's very easy to code yourself into a corner where you need to get state from here. You need to get state from your user container over to your recipe container, or vice versa, and you don't know how to do it. Maybe your user container is inside your recipe container and you're not sure how to get state back up. And then you have to go through a whole rewrite of your application to try and get your state where you want to go. So once you start to be able to think in components like this and thinking about the hierarchy and where state is needed, it becomes a whole lot easier. You can even draw your application out like this first before you build it to give you a clear example of what state needs to go where at what time. So yeah, I hope that was a clear example about state and props. I'll make some more videos regarding React for beginners coming soon. Thanks for watching.